Hello, welcome to Writers and Books Meet the BOA Author Series. I'm Sakshi Kumar, the Adult Programs Coordinator at Writers and Books. For those of you who are new to us, Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, a bookstore, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. You can find more information at our website, wab.org. Please say hello in the chat. I already see some people already talking in there. Let us know when you're here. Feel free to submit questions through the chat, through the Q&A function as well. Books are available through our bookstore, &Books. I'll put this link in the chat. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands in which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the Keeper of the Western Door. We're so happy to have Sean Thomas Dougherty with us tonight. First, we'll hear him read. Then he'll be in conversation with author and poet Peter Connors, publisher and executive director of BOA Editions. In his 20th book, Sean Thomas Dougherty brings us a memoir-like prose sequence, reflecting on disability, chronic illness, addiction, survival, love, and parenthood. Death Prefers the Minor Keys is, most of all, a love letter to Dougherty's wife and a chronicle of her courage and complicity in the face of long-term illness and addiction. Dougherty's awards include a Fulbright Lectureship to the Balkans and an appearance in Best American Poetry. Known for his dynamic readings, he has performed at hundreds of venues, universities, and festivals. He lives in Erie, PA. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Sakshi. Hey, everybody. So I'm going to read two of the first pieces from Death Prefers the Minor Keys. And some of you know I work as a med tech. And so this first piece is kind of an ode to my med cart, which I spend a lot of time on. It's called The Shape of a Pill. What is there, if not this labor, the light labor of hands, popping pills out of packages, checking names, prescription tags, double checking the correct dosage. Outside is only the dark and the near empty parking lot, the small labor of looking to make sure a sleeping man is breathing. So many shapes and colors of different pills that pass through my gloved hands. Nearly translucent, gel-like, amber ovals that glitter like jewels and stick to the pack. Tiny white ovals that could put a man to sleep. Brown pills, red pills, blue, ovals and circles, so we may swallow them, though some anti-anxiety drugs come in strange shapes. Buspirone with side indent tabs, I suspect so one could break in half if needed. There are even hexagons for high blood pressure and narcolepsy, a pill to open one's eyes, to close one's eyes, to speed up the heart's rate or slow it down, to level the blood pressure. All these different shapes for the body, for the organs, the blood, the brain, numbered and lettered, made in giant factories. They pass through my hands. I put them in tiny cups. I mix some in yogurt so they go down the throat and no one chokes. After I close my med cart and turn off the light, I imagine the pills glow with a light of their own, snow light, locomotive light, electrocardiogram light, the light that travels through the veins, blue river light, autumn leaf flight light, because the med cart wants to fly, wants to visit the old villages, It knows nothing of profit. It flies through the narrow mountain pass, wants to roll toward the bed of the woman in pain on a thin mattress, the man coughing in a mine, the barefoot child wheezing, the one who cannot sit up straight, the one lisping, the one going blind, the palsied. Backwards, the med cart flies, carrying all the human labor that made these pills. The chemists with their calculations, the giant corporations who paid for them. Someone needed to imagine the need, which is another way to say they diagnosed. A doctor somewhere thought up the first ailment, checked the lab work, wrote it down, all the pieces of paper, encyclopedic calculations, compounds, formulas, and then one day the masked workers leaned over the assembly line. Thousands of hair-knitted and gloved factory workers, suited executives flying first class, because they invented a tiny pill placed on the tongue like the Eucharist, for the body, for the blood, dissolving down to the elements, magnesium, sodium, tree tea leaf, turmeric, oyster shell. What is prescribed in this life? What is taken and what is given? But where is the cure for loneliness? The med cart speaks in a soft voice. I have one. What is the pill for love lorn? I have one. What is the pill for grief? I have one. Is there a pill for hopelessness? I have one. Is there a pill for my father's beatings, my mother's slaps? Is there a pill for wanting to fly? A punk rock pill to replace my pacemaker? I have one. A pill to fill the cathedral hollow in my chest? I have one. A pill for exile, evacuation, a pill to forget genocide, a bel canto pill to recall, a heart-shaped pill for regret, a pill the shape of a trumpet's bell or a tambourine, so I may shimmy and sway, though no one has ever asked me to dance. Do you have a pill to teach me words like peonies or bourgeoisie, an Episcopalian pill that smells like old money? Can you call me in that prescription? A pill so I may sing and open my diaphragm round as the O's in osteoporosis. The second piece is called Written on the Back of Medical Forms. And most of these essays began that way, with notations while I was at work, where a line would happen or some would come to me, or something would happen. And when I get to break, I'd write it down on the back of these medical forms. And then these accumulated over time. And eventually they became a kind of collage of that I worked together. And so if these pieces sound like they jump and leap, it's because they were written like many in pieces and sort of put together like a puzzle. This is about partly about somebody I take care of. What I have to tell you here has more to do with being human than with spirit. But then what is spirit but the heart of being human? The man wakes up to piss at 2 a.m. After he is done, I tell him, come on, let's get back to bed. No, he says, I am not going back to bed. He stamps his foot and all the dark disappears. It is so strange, these moments that feel the most familiar are the ones that feel the strangest. It is so strange. These moments that feel the most familiar are the ones that feel the strangest. I clap the lights back off, take his hand. He says, I'm not tired. It's night, I say. I got him gently into bed, all the while chattering about what we will do tomorrow, how he must sleep because he will see his mother. And you don't want to fall asleep visiting her. But I am home, he says, as I pull the covers to his chin. As I tuck him in, I tell him, no, no, you are here, home and away, where I take care of you. And as his eyes close, I tell him in exquisite detail the wonderful sausages I will fry him up for breakfast. Somewhere I erred. Somewhere I forgot the cartography for going forward. I am hollow as a sewer pipe. I make notes on medical forms while you are at the hospital. Everyone in my care is sleeping easy. Then they aren't, confused, thinking it is time to shower. The woman tells me she has showered at midnight, returns to her room, emerges to tell me again, are you okay? I ask. No, I'm not fucking okay. Then she calms. I miss my children, she says. I remind her, but they are grown men. You see your family more than most of us who work here. She wails, I haven't seen them in so long. You just visited home yesterday. Try to remember. You had a good visit. I hate my mother. Now I know she just doesn't want to go back to bed. Here, play some cards in your room. I have meds to pass, but I'll be back. I try not to indulge self-pity. You text me the MRR when okay. Sometimes I swear this building is alive and breathing. Years ago, it was a motel. The ghosts of divorced fishermen wander the halls with the residents. When it rains, everything is murmurous. What I thought was a scar was only a cloud come to rest on my wrist. My grief at your long passing hides in my marrow. When I met you, I recognized you by how you wore the rain. Or were you a willow in the wind and I was a small bird? I never figured out if it was you or was it the dead trees singing? Deja vu. It is so ironic, these moments that feel the most familiar are the ones that feel the strangest. The tree that sings for the dead. What is the distance between belonging and still stranger? Our blood reaches back to the same black mountains. You feel you have been there before, done it all before. How easy it is for a place to feel like home. In the city, you do not speak the language, except for a few greetings, numbers. You grin like the village idiot, point at the word for pardon. After a few weeks, the checkout girl at the apoteca recognizes your daughter in the pram, cuckoo, and the man at the newsstand kiosk hands you your brand of cigarettes before you ask. What minor keys that haunt me? How distant is the space between friend and stranger, between foreigner and you belong? Don't be fooled. You feel you have been there before, done it again. Each night, the man forgets the day. The man mistakes me for Sisyphus. The man opens the bathroom door, and I am there. Nice job, I say. I will help you get back into bed. You're right on schedule. He says, I don't want to go back to bed. I say, you always go to the bathroom at this time. Look at the clock. It's only 1:44 a.m. It's the middle of the night. His mind resets itself to distant memories. I walk him across the room and help him turn to sit on his bed. But before he swings his legs up, he stops and stiffens. His face gets all screwed up. But why are you awake? He asks. Who am I say. In this way, I can judge how confused he is. He looks, then says my name, and he says it with affection. I know now he will be okay. I watch over you, I say. I watch over 8 people while you all sleep. That's why I'm awake. 8 people, he exclaims with honest surprise. I stay up to make sure you are okay, that you haven't having seizures, to make sure you sleep well. And when I wake up, will you sleep then? He asks. No, I will sleep. No, I will help you when you wake. Then I'll make breakfast. Maybe you can help me. But what, he says, if I never wake up? What if, shh, 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 I will wake you up. Don't worry. I lay him back down on the pillow. Don't worry. How often I say this. It means so much more than what it says. But he persists as his eyes close. He needs to know. Will you never be able to sleep then? Don't they let you, Sean? Don't they ever let you lay down your head? One more. Hi.
I'm clapping. That was beautiful, man. So nice to hear those in your voice.
Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, I want to mention before we even start that for anybody in or around Rochester, Sean is going to be reading as part of BOA's annual Dine and Rhyme event this Thursday at 7 p.m. at a place called the Jackrabbit Club in Rochester. There's information and tickets for sale at the BOA Editions website, which is boaeditions.org. If you have never gotten a chance to see Sean read in person, I highly, highly recommend it. We get a little taste of it on Zoom, but it's nothing like the real thing. So I'm psyched about this book. And among other things, as soon as I saw the title, it just rang true to me. And I'm not even sure exactly why, but you have so much music in your writing, whether it's the sound of the poems themselves, musical references. So my big question is, why does Death prefer the minor keys?
Which is the big question, right?
The biggie.
Well, you know, if we look at, the musicology, I'm not a musician, but, if we look at musicology and the difference between minor chords and major chords, often those chords which evoke a kind of lamentation or, a sense of sorrow can be found in the minor key. The minor key is a kind of progression which um, which gets into the I want to say something like it gets into the body. Like the major chord is when music leaves our bodies, when the music soars into the air, right, and flies. But the minor key is when it enters our bones and when it enters our bodies. Uh, and so it's the sound of death, the sound of melancholy, the sound of autumn, the sound of bareness, the sound of, a discordant wind. Uh, yeah. Plus, death came one night and said, I prefer the minor keys.
I think of the minor fall and the major lift too from
Yes,
Leonard Cohen, which
right,
that song was the title of one of your other BOA books, right? Broken Hallelujahs.
exactly. Does that make sense though? That keys, like they enter us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And even people don't know music at all, you feel when the minor comes. You can
Right.
absolutely feel it in your body. So sort of the reverse question of the idea of how did your influences or how did your experiences in, working in with long-term illness, working in healthcare facilities, including your facility where you work with people with traumatic brain injuries, what did you learn through writing about these different situations that you've been able to bring into your work?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things with my job is that every day is kind of like the same story told differently. Like not a lot changes every day, but never, no, no day is ever the same. And I started to think about that, like about repetition, about the same thing happening over and over, but not but slightly changed and slightly different. And so your sense of time becomes very complicated when you deal with that. The people I take care of, time is both a friend and an enemy because there some people I take care of, they're depending upon how their injury was, they're caught in the past. They want to refine their old life, right? And then other people have come to terms with that. And so they very much live in the present. And then some of the other ones, they have time space issues. They time travel, like the man and who I was talking about there, he'll time travel all the time. He'll think he's 20. He'll think he's, 50, 40, and then, actually he's much older. Sometimes, very rarely, he's a little kid. So it's kind of like Alzheimer's, but it's not because if we, he has a one-on-one. And so during the day, you can cue him to say in the present tense. But it makes you think about like perception too, about like, well, what is the real, what is that, Uh, and so that makes me think about language itself. And that's one of the things I started to try to reflect that by breaking narratives, because I face that all the time where someone's telling me a story or somebody I take care of, and then suddenly we're someplace else. And then we come back. But there's a sort of, in its lack of cohesiveness, there is a cohesiveness because it's from a person and it's a life. And it's like a life told in fragments. And so the actual discourse that I work with at work, I tried to reflect in this book. So pieces will start, like in the last piece that I read, where there's the narrative of the man, but there's a jump back to when me and my wife lived in Europe, or there's a call from her, in the middle of that, and then I'm back into the narrative. And so I wanted these pieces to have permission to act in that way too. In some ways, I think the people that I take care of too, how they articulate themselves is actually closer to how the brain actually works. Like the conversation we're having now is not really how my brain works. It's linear, it's straightforward, it's dialogic, but my brain is sort of palimpsests. It's here. I'm also in memory at the same time. I'm thinking about three different things at once, so I think how the people I take care of often articulate is probably closer to how the brain actually works, but it's not necessarily the best for communicative purposes, But in terms of like how what actually goes on in our head occurs, it's probably closer to what actually goes on in our head. And so in this book, I wanted to try to capture that idea of multiple levels of meanings happening in space. There's narrative and there's.
And why did you feel?
Go.
I'm so sorry I cut you off. I was going to ask why I'm going to just call them prose poems or prose, prose fragments, prose pieces felt like the right form to capture this.
I think because it's a tension between sentence and fragment, and so by putting it all in a prose, it's like, I don't have to worry about the other things. This is the problem in poetry. Like line breaks and white space give us as another tool, but there's also another tool that we have to worry about, and sometimes just the sentence and the fragment, the tension between those two, that's enough to handle, Also, though, it is prose to me. This book is very much to be read from beginning to end. There's an arc. Images repeat themselves. Stories repeat themselves. There's a story in here about a family I ran across who were picking apples in winter. They were obviously homeless. They had a station wagon. It was full of things. And they repeat after, things that my wife repeat. So there's the idea too of that this really, it's poetry, but it's something else too, which shouldn't surprise anybody who's read things I've written, because I'm always in that space between. We've talked about this over years, that space between things. This is a book between things. And the people I'm writing about are things. My family, my wife, the people I take care of. We live in that other world that, is outside of the world. People just go about their jobs. There's so this book too had to exist then in the slipstream, in a space or a genre which sort of pushed against the boundaries of genre, and claim that.
I think there's, in writing about work, which you do, I love there's a blurb on the back from Jennifer Franklin. And she calls you the great bard of the American working man. And you've absolutely written so well about work. And as you're talking about repetition too, I think of the idea of work. We get up and we go to work. We get up and we go to work. And there's also a lot of addiction in this book. And
Yeah,
addiction, if nothing else, is tedious and repetitive.
right.
You know, get high, get
It's so
drunk,
true.
get get sober, get high, get drunk, get sober. So there's the subject matter leads itself right to repetition. And I think
Yeah,
also there's a lot of poems in here where you just drop right into the middle of the story, right in the middle. And in fact they start lowercase, so it just you're just in the flow of that, so it makes a lot of sense. But I did want to ask you real quick, because you have written so consistently about work and you've done it so well, what poets you look to who you feel like have written really well about work and labor that you return to, or who have informed your own work?
Dorian Lux, Joe Weil or two that and then there's people like, I mean, some of the people who are here, like my friend Connie Post, who writes about like the labor of family, the labor of taking your kids, the labor of disability. So there's different kinds of labor. Yeah, 'cause labor is often presented right as this sort of like 20th century white working class factory, but labor is way more complicated than that. You know? We all do different kinds of labors, throughout the day. Mm-hmm.
So somebody put a question in here, and I do want to let people know that I'm looking at the chat. So if you want to drop a question in, I will do my best to get to it and read it. G.E. Schwartz said, will you turn this text into a piece of theater, a long monologue?
Oh wow, that would be a lot of work, gee. That would be, you know. But it's interesting you ask that because in some ways there's a lot of monologue in this book, and there are actually pieces which really are monologues in different voices, and they'd probably I think of them as wanting to be spoken rather than just exist on the page. So. But I think I worked too many hours to be able to turn it into a theater piece. But if somebody wanted to turn it into a theater piece, I'd be more than willing to let them, attempt to do that.
So, I was thinking, I don't know that we've ever even talked about this. It was kind of amazing because Sean and I first connected at a reading for Slipstream magazine at Talking Leaves Books, the one that was right outside of Niagara Falls, and that was probably about 22 years ago at this point. But I don't think we've
Freely
ever.
was there too, in Kazim Ali.
Yes, yeah, that's
That
right.
crazy? Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I met. Yeah, that's when I met everybody, all those
Mhm.
folks. Um, you write a lot about family, friends, like actual people that are in your life that you see every day, or people that you work with, and so forth. What is your personal philosophy about writing about friends, loved ones, family?
I mean, that's sort of why I write. I mean, I'd sort of try to make art out of the dailiness, sort of about nothing. And I think because, I mean, everybody think about your life, like the most like difficult and the most joyous moments usually come out of these simple moments where you're with somebody you care about, or you're in the house, or you're with your kids, or you're in your backyard, or they come really out of nothing. So the idea that we have to maybe go to Rome, right, and sit on the Spanish steps and ponder our existence to make art. Um, that's not my life, and that's not the life of most everybody I know. You know, life is, you go to the grocery store, and you got bills to pay, and you got to go to work, and your kid's sick, and somebody gets really sick, and you got to go to the hospital. And so, out of the dailiness of that, particularly American poets, we do this more. I think, how do we turn that into something which we can call art, or maybe something even more than art, maybe something closer to a prayer, or maybe something more than a prayer, you know. And as we take that, we sort of save the dailiness. Somebody asked me, or maybe it was on social media today, about obsessions. Maybe it was Philip Metris from Cleveland, about writers' obsessions. And when I saw that question, I realized I've been obsessed by disappearances and absences. And so out of the dailiness, like I'm constantly worried about, well, my wife's dying, first of all, because she's been struggling with these medical conditions and addictions for years. Something happening to my kids, people I've lost and loved, and I think that's out of the domestic. Tied to that is the sense of the potential for absence or the absences of people that we love, how they're far away, are gone. What can we make out of that? And that's when I think the poem becomes so important, because when we write poems and we share poems, when we share stories and we write, we fill the space between things. We fill that absence. And so story can become a kind of bridge between us, because we all have these, right? One of the things that, that's the great truth of being a person is that we all become someone's absence, if we're loved in this life. Like eventually we're all gonna die, you know? So how do we bridge that? How do we get to some place that is more than the absence, that can feel so a kind of lightness, which is painful, maybe through these stories and the things that we write and tell each other, it creates, it takes the space, which is like this, and it brings us together, And for me, what I always think about too is for strange, it brings that to strangers. It's not even to the people that we love, but to people out there in the world who might find our work, and then it becomes maybe across countries, maybe across languages. Did that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think about your work over the years, which was a real treat of working on your new and selected, um, which BOA also published. Is I think, your work, absolutely, I could sit down and read that first book and read up until now and get a real strong sense of your life, the arc of your life, the people who've come in and out of your life. And I know very, personal things about different people that you've connected with and things that have happened to them and so forth. In one way, it's the story of your life, and another way, it's just the story of life, right? But I'm curious, because there's so much that is personal, and because this is your 20th book. So are there challenges to mining personal material that, let's say, maybe you didn't have for your first book, that you did struggle with maybe for your 20th book, or vice versa? Are there things that get easier as you go along too, as a poet?
I think it gets harder. I think everybody who's here listening tonight will agree with this. It gets harder because as human beings, we become more complicated. We become more complicated emotionally. I mean, you, right? I mean, you're the same guy like 20 years ago? Nah. We grow. Our concerns, our questions, the dailiness of our relationships become much more complicated. We're not the same fathers, husbands, wives, lovers, nothing. As we grow, that becomes much more difficult because it's much more intense, because we feel things more, we ask more questions of this life. And so how do we get that into the work, Mm-hmm. So for me, it's much harder. And I think that's why this book, I think, is more complicated in a way which isn't necessarily aesthetic. It's not just about making art, but it's about to reflect the complications of being a person. I'm about to turn 60, and just, life is complicated. And so the work tries to reflect that there. There's a poet, Mary Ruefle, who I really like, who I think gets that too. She gets the complications. Her work is elusive at times, but, it's elusive in a way that life can be elusive. Yeah. Mm. And this is one of the things to me, it always comes back to language, but language is at the abeyance of life for me. Like, it isn't about life is at the abeyance of art. For me, it's about art is a tool, another tool to try to figure out what it is to be a human being who lives in the 21st century at this time, and struggles daily. So it's not that like I'm trying to make art necessarily as much as art is a tool to try to understand these things. Yeah.
I think with your work too, I think of it more along the lines of like a jazz musician improvising off a theme, but you'll touch on these themes, let's say addiction, and then look at it this way and look at it this way and turn it over and look at it this way and through this lens. And I think again, your work creates this sort of 360-degree view of a life lived because you're looking at it through all these different lenses and perspectives and characters and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, and
Wow.
then, your last book with Boa, Second O of Sorrow, came out in 2018. And there is a poem in that called Why Bother, which has been
Oh, yeah.
super cool to watch blow up. And if people have not heard or seen that poem, just Google it and it's everywhere. So can you just tell us for a minute about like the experience of that, like what's happened with that poem and some cool things related to it? Because it really is pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, but one of the things which is crazy about this, I just wrote that poem for Sylvana Straw. My friend in DC was having a hard time, writing, and so I just said, "Oh, I gotta help her out. I'm gonna write this poem for her and see if I can say why we do what we do." And so it came out of such a personal space, and then to see it just sort of randomly fly around the world the way it has and be translated into all these languages. It's not my poem anymore, you know. That poem belongs to whoever finds it. It periodically just starts flying around someplace. Like earlier this year, the Turks, I have a friend on Twitter who translates it. She's translated it a couple times. She tweaked it. She told me I don't read Turkish, so I'm not quite sure. And she put that up, and then suddenly thousands of Turks are reading it in Turkish. And that poem's not mine. It belongs to somebody else. I think it's funny that that poem got really popular and famous because most of what I write is dense and has a million words, and so one of the few things I wrote with just a few words, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
But
That might be one of your shortest poems that I remember,
yeah,
certainly. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and it's kind of custom made like that too, to share and to go viral. Like it's like boom, you can, it's what, 5 lines, 4 lines, something like this.
yeah, yeah.
I also want to give you a minute to talk about the anthology that you did recently, which I think is a really, really cool project that came out in 2019 alongside We Travel, Contemporary Poets on Autism. Can you just talk for a minute about that book and maybe turn some people onto it?
Yeah, I mean, I came out of a project. Hold on a second. So I got that book right here. There it is. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, it actually started because my wife Lisa was starting to write about our daughter Amara, and I started to see all these people who were writing poems like Meredith Bergman, Connie Post, who I mentioned, Cheryl Dumas-Neal has written about it, Jennifer Franklin, Shireen Gilmore, Tony Blogger. I could go on and on, George Gaida. Um, that there was just so much work out there that people were addressing autism really from personal ways because of people in their family, people that they loved. And so one of the things I really think this is like one of the more important things I've done because it also created a community. Like a lot of us didn't know each other, some of us did, but there were many of us who didn't, and so it sort of brought us together just so our shared concerns with it. The book is problematic. It has some problems because we couldn't try to figure out whether to put autistic writers in it or not, so we kind of half-stepped it at the end. So I think if I did it again, I'd either just like leave the autistic writers out or try to get more of them. The problem is though that a lot of the writers that we asked who were autistic writers didn't want to appear in it. I think because they thought it was pigeonholing them. That was the feeling I got after the book was out and I talked to people afterwards. They didn't want to be seen as an autistic writer. And some of these were people that, I'm pretty good friends with. They didn't want that. But the book was more, it's more like a caregiving book. It's about, how do we care for the people that we write, and the shares and concerns, the struggles and the joys of it. So, also the book didn't exist. Nobody had done this book before. So we were trying to fill a hole to show that people could engages. But again, it comes out of the daily. Most of this work comes out of the daily work and that people were doing in their own families and their own lives. And so these aren't theoretical poems. These are poems from the lived experience again. Yeah. And that's something I come back to a lot. This used to be like a big debate, like back in the 90s, poetry, which is more aesthetic and the lived experience. I always come back to the life. Poems too are about the life. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here. And again, I want to remind people that Sean's going to be reading in Rochester on Thursday at 7 p.m. at the Jackrabbit Club. So if you're interested, please check it out. And tickets and information and stuff is at boaeditions.org. Sean, where else real quick are you reading? I know you got a bunch of events coming up. Do you want to mention anything else that you got coming up?
Tomorrow night, I'm reading online with 8 other poets for this new magazine, Public School. It's part of this Kazat series out of Ann Arbor. Scott Beale, Julie Babcock, Ellen. What the hell's her name? I'm so old. I can't remember my name. What's my name? They're doing it, and so that's going to be tomorrow at 7 o'clock. You can look on Facebook. There's a Facebook event page. If you write them, they'll give you the link. It's called Public School. Thursday is Diane Prime in Rochester. And then on Saturday, I'm going to be in Cleveland for the Incubator Festival. I'm teaching a workshop there on caregiving and writing. And then I'm doing a reading with a whole bunch of superstar poets. I'm going to read very quietly in between them on Saturday night. And that's all free. The Incubator Festival in Cleveland is free. If anybody is near there, you can go to see all these workshops for nothing. They have great funding, and they're also doing a series of events online this week too, as we speak.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm psyched to see you on Thursday. If you wouldn't mind leaving us with a poem, we would appreciate it. And thanks, man. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Peter. All right, everybody. This is called 11. When my wife catches the clock blinking, 11:11, she says, "Look, the angels are watching." Or is it her dead grandfather who visits to stroke the hairs on the back of her hand as he did when she was a child? I can feel our dead reach through the veil. I worked with a white woman in a care home on the 3rd shift when she learned on the 11 o'clock news her adult son was dead. They found him in his friend's flat, a pocket full of used fentanyl patches. She opened her mouth to speak, but only the dark bird of grief flew from her throat. When every minute of your life becomes the 11th hour, the dread of waiting, in the long, familiar quiet at the funeral, the mourners moved one by one. Her son worked at the bakery beside the L. 11, the grief of this woman, pale as an orchid. In the 11th sentence, I want to ask, what is more unsafe than love? The bread of the body rises. No coding for the DT hallucinations. Hallelujahs at the Baptist church. Venn diagrams fell through the trees outside the Suboxone clinic. Rain crossed the 7-Eleven parking lot, littered with used needles. Pigeons cooed in the cathedral rafters. There are 11 steps to revelations. The angels herald us at 11:11. At the hospital, there was a nurse named Ekundea from Nigeria who would sing softly in Yoruba as she changed my wife's bandages. She nodded at my wife's complaints, the doctor who didn't prescribe enough pain meds. Then the nurse said, without the pain, what would we have to carry? After Judas died, 11 apostles remained. I wonder if she was one of them. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Sean, for the wonderful reading. And thank you, Peter, for such a great conversation. Finally, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in pre-ordering the book, I've linked it in the chat a couple of times. Yeah, have a great night, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.